You walked away from a life of missed chances into a billboard blinking witness the impossible. The marquee glowed electric blue in the desert darkness, the usher's grin split the night, and your camera rolled when the man in the tux stepped into a coffin-like box. At dawn, only silence answers your questions.
The vanishing act, the neon blaze of the Las Vegas Strip, was a glorious, garish lie. From a distance, it promised endless possibility, a machine designed to print money and memories. But up close, after days of chasing lights and noise without sleep, the sheen wore off. You saw the cracks, the hollow stare of people who'd stayed too long, the frayed cuffs on a dealer's shirt, the stale smell of cigarette smoke, and broken dreams baked into the carpet of every casino. Ben Walker, was one of the cracked, a freelance photographer from Portland. I'd come to Vegas on a gig that fell through the moment I landed. Now I was stranded, my savings evaporating faster than a puddle in the Mojave sun, too proud to call home and admit failure. My only solace was my oldest friend, Jake, who'd flown in on a whim, seeing my increasingly despondent texts as a cry for help. "Dude, you're in Vegas. Stop moping. Let's go find some real trouble," Jake said, clapping me on the back as we navigated the crowded sidewalk outside the Mirage. He was everything I wasn't, effortlessly charismatic, built like a college linebacker, and blessed with an optimism that was either infectious or incredibly annoying, depending on my mood. "The only trouble I can afford is a bad hot dog," I grumbled, shoving my hands in my pockets. That's when we saw it. Not on a smartphone screen or a tourist pamphlet, but glowing in the desert night, separate from the main cluster of casinos, nestled on a lonely stretch of road that seemed to lead into nothingness. A billboard. It was vintage, its frame rusted, its light bulbs flickering with a faint, sizzling energy. The image was a stark, dramatic silhouette of a man in a tailcoat, arms outstretched. The text, in a dripping art-deco font, glowed a sickly electric blue. Witness the impossible. The Vanishing Man, live at the Black Thorne Theater. One night only. There was no address, no time, just the name, the Black Thorne Theater. "Now that's what I'm talking about," Jake exclaimed, his eyes wide. "Some weird off-strip weirdness. This is the real Vegas. Let's go." "Jake, it doesn't even list a time. It's probably been abandoned for decades." "That sign's a relic." "Exactly. It's an adventure." "Come on, Ben. When was the last time you did something that wasn't on a schedule? That you couldn't Google reviews for?" He had a point. My life had become a series of algorithmically determined choices. This was spontaneous, and the name, The Vanishing Man, felt like a dark joke aimed directly at my current state of feeling invisible and irrelevant. "Fine," I relented, "but if we get murdered by a desert cannibal, I'm haunting you first." Jake just laughed, his voice booming in the quiet night. We asked a few cab drivers about the Black Thorne. They'd just shrug or shake their heads. "Ain't nothing out that way but sand and crazies," one said. A quick search on our phones yielded nothing. No listing, no reviews, no history. It was as if the billboard was a ghost, a message meant only for us. Using the billboard as a landmark, we started walking. The sounds of the Strip faded behind us, replaced by the lonely whisper of the wind and the distant hum of a lone highway. The air grew cooler, drier. The glittering skyline shrank in our wake, a distant Oz we were willingly turning our backs on. After 20 minutes of walking down an increasingly derelict service road, we saw it. The Black Thorne Theater. It was a crumbling art-deco nightmare, a monument to a dead era's forgotten ambitions. Its facade was once white, but was now stained a grimy gray from decades of desert dust. A massive, broken marquee jutted out like a tombstone, its letters missing, leaving only ghostly outlines where words like glamour and spectacular had once glowed. The windows were boarded up, and the main double doors, heavy things of dark wood banded with tarnished brass, were slightly ajar. "Told you it was real," Jake whispered, his bravado now tempered with a dose of awe. A faint, flickering light came from within. As we approached, a figure emerged from the shadows beside the door. He was an old man, stooped and skeletal, dressed in a moth-eaten usher's uniform that might have been maroon a century ago. His skin was pale and papery, stretched tight over sharp bones, and his eyes were milky with cataracts. He held out a bony hand. In it were 2 tickets, yellowed and brittle with age. "Admission," he croaked, his voice like dry leaves scraping on stone. "How much?" I asked, pulling out my wallet. The old man's lips stretched into a rictus grin, revealing blackened gums. "The show is its own price." He didn't take the money. He just pushed the tickets into my hand. His touch was icy and sent a jolt up my arm. He then turned and shuffled back into the shadows, seeming to dissolve into them. "Okay, that was seriously creepy," I said, my heart starting to hammer. "It's atmosphere, Ben. They're committed to the bit. This is awesome." Jake, ever the enthusiast, pushed the heavy door open. It swung inward without a sound. We stepped into the lobby. It was a vast, dusty space. A grand staircase swept up to a balcony that was shrouded in darkness. Faded murals of laughing, flapper-era partygoers adorned the walls, but their faces were cracked and peeling, giving them a grotesque, weeping quality. The air was thick with the smell of decay-old velvet, dry rot, and something sweetly metallic, like old blood. There was no ticket booth, no concession stand, just an endless, dusty silence. A single, naked light bulb hung over another set of doors leading to the auditorium. It swayed slightly, making the shadows dance. Beneath it stood another usher, a twin of the first, just as ancient and corpse-like. He wordlessly took our tickets, tore them in half with a sound like a snapping bone, and gestured toward the doors. Pushing them open, we entered the auditorium. It was a cavern of shadows. The ceiling was lost in darkness. The stage was a vast, empty proscenium arch, framed by heavy, moth-eaten velvet curtains of a deep, bloody crimson. The seats, perhaps 1,000 of them, were empty, all except for 3. 3 figures sat scattered in the vastness of the orchestra section, rows apart from each other. The dim light from the ghost light on stage, a single bare bulb on a stand, didn't so much illuminate them as it did distort them. Their faces were oddly blurred, smudged, as if someone had taken an eraser to a photograph of them. You could make out the basic shape of a head, the color of hair, but no distinct features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. It was deeply unnerving, a trick of the light that felt like a threat. "Where is everyone?" I whispered to Jake. "Private show, man." "Exclusive," he whispered back, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He felt it too. The wrongness. We took seats near the back on the aisle, our instincts screaming at us to stay close to an exit. The silence was profound. We couldn't even hear the 3 other audience members breathing. Then, without warning, the ghost light on stage extinguished. plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. A moment later, a single bright spotlight clicked on, centered on the stage. There was no music, no announcement, no rustle of curtains. A man simply stood there. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light, making him look like a walking silhouette. His skin was pale, almost luminous. His hair was slicked back, jet black. And his smile was all wrong. It was too wide, stretching nearly ear to ear, a gash of perfect white teeth that held no warmth, no joy. It was the smile of a shark. He didn't bow. He didn't greet the audience. He simply stared out into the darkness, his head tilted, as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the vast room, clear and cold as ice. "Tonight," he breathed, the words slithering into our ears, "I will disappear." That was it. No grand pronouncements, no fanfare. He gestured to a simple, polished wooden box that stood center stage. It was about 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide, like an upright coffin. He opened a door on its front, revealing an empty, dark interior. He stepped inside. The door closed with a definitive, echoing thud that made me jump. Silence. The spotlight remained fixed on the box. Nothing happened for a full minute, 2 minutes. The air grew colder. I could see my own breath forming a faint mist in the air. Then a sound, a faint, slow drum roll. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the very walls of the theater, growing steadily louder, faster, more frantic. The drum roll reached a fever pitch and then stopped dead. The door of the box swung open. It was empty. The vanishing man was gone. A beat of stunned silence. Then the 3 other audience members began to clap. But the sound was wrong. Their hands moved together, but they made no noise. It was a pantomime of applause, a silent, frantic motion that was more terrifying than any scream. Their featureless faces remained fixed on the empty box. Jake and I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The silent clapping continued, a grotesque mockery of praise. Then the first scream tore through the theater. It didn't come from the stage. It came from the audience, from the woman sitting in the 3rd row. Her silent clapping stopped. Her blurred face seemed to contort, the features struggling to form an expression of ultimate terror. She raised her hands to where her mouth should have been, and then she began to dissolve, not like smoke, but like a sandcastle in the tide. Her form lost cohesion, breaking apart into a million particles of gray dust. She slumped forward, and then she was gone. Nothing remained but a faint, shimmering haze in the air where she had been sitting. The 2 remaining audience members didn't react. They just kept clapping their soundless applause. Another scream. The man in the 7th row, his body didn't dissolve. It folded. It was the only word for it. His limbs twisted and contorted backwards, his torso compacting inward with a series of wet, cracking sounds that echoed horribly in the silent space. He was pulled into himself, smaller and smaller, until he was a knot of flesh and fabric. And then, nothing. Vanished. The last audience member, a figure whose gender was now impossible to determine, finally stopped clapping. Its head turned slowly, and for a fraction of a second, the blur over its face cleared. I saw a pair of wide, terrified eyes, a mouth open in a silent plea. Then it Two simply winked out of existence, like a television screen being turned off. The theater was empty now. Just Jake and me, the empty stage, and the spotlight still shining on the wooden box. "We have to go now," I yelled, my survival instincts finally overriding my paralysis. We scrambled out of our seats and bolted for the doors we'd entered through. I hit the push bar first, bursting out into the lobby, not the exit, the lobby. We were right back where we started. The dusty murals, the grand staircase, it was impossible. The doors had led directly outside moments ago. What the hell? Jake yelled, panic seizing his voice. We turned and ran for another set of doors on the opposite side of the lobby. We threw them open and stumbled through, onto the stage. We were standing in the spotlight, right next to the wooden box. The vast, dark auditorium stretched out before us, empty and menacing. "No, no, no," I chanted, backing away in terror. We jumped off the stage and ran down the main aisle, heading for an emergency exit we'd spotted near the front. Jake hit the bar. A loud alarm should have sounded. Instead, there was only silence, and beyond the door was not a street, but another backstage area filled with ropes and dusty props. We were trapped in a labyrinth, a house of mirrors with no reflection. We tried every door, every corridor. Each one led us back to the stage or the lobby, or to a dead-end dressing room filled with yellowed playbills for shows that never existed. We ended up back in the auditorium, panting, hearts racing, our clothes soaked with a cold sweat. We were rats in a maze. The spotlight was still on, and standing next to the wooden box was the Vanishing Man. He was exactly as he was before, but his tuxedo was now blacker than a void, a darkness so absolute it hurt to look at. His wide, razor smile was fixed on us. "The performance requires an audience," he whispered, his voice now holding a subtle, grinding quality like stones moving deep underground. "And every magic trick needs volunteers." He gestured to the box. The door swung open, revealing the dark interior. It no longer looked empty, it looked infinite. "No," I said, the word a weak gasp. Jake, however, seemed different. The panic had left his face, replaced by a blank, placid expression. The Vanishing Man's gaze was locked on him. "Jake, Jake, look at me," I shouted, grabbing his arm. He shook me off, his strength effortless. His eyes were glazed, fixed on the infinite darkness within the box. "It's okay, Ben," he said, his voice a flat, emotionless drone. "It's my turn. I want to see how it's done." "No, Jake, fight it. That's not you." But it was too late. He walked forward, his steps measured and calm like a sleepwalker. He walked up the steps to the stage and stopped before the Vanishing Man. The entity's smile seemed to widen another impossible inch. Jake turned and looked at me one last time. There was no fear in his eyes, only a vacant, terrible curiosity. Then he stepped into the box. The door closed. Thud. The Vanishing Man turned his horrifying smile toward me. He was the only thing in the world. "A finale requires a witness," he whispered. "Otherwise, did it ever really happen?" He raised a hand and snapped his fingers. The door of the box swung open. It was empty. Jake was gone, vanished, erased. I stood alone in the terrible silence, the weight of what I'd seen crushing my soul. The Vanishing Man took a step toward me, then another, gliding more than walking. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, waiting to be folded, dissolved, or pulled into the box, but it didn't come. I heard a soft, dry laugh right in front of me. I could smell a scent of old dust and ozone. Then the feeling of his presence simply vanished. I dared to open my eyes. The theater was dark. The spotlight was off. The box was gone. I was standing alone in the crumbling, dusty auditorium. Morning light, faint and gray, was filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. I don't know how I found the exit. I must have stumbled through 100 wrong doors before one finally, miraculously, opened onto the desert street. I collapsed onto the cracked asphalt, sobbing, gasping in the clean, cold air. I ran back to the Strip, to the police, babbling my story. They found the theater, they said. An abandoned building scheduled for demolition. They found no box, no stage lights, no evidence of a show, and certainly no Jake. His hotel room was empty, his suitcase still packed. His phone went straight to voicemail. They found my story amusing. A hallucination brought on by heat stroke and alcohol, they suggested. Maybe my friend had just left early, gone home. They'd file a missing person report, but their eyes told me they wouldn't try very hard. I am back in Portland now. I sit in my quiet apartment, and I write this down. It's all I can do. I can't sleep. When I close my eyes, I see the box. I see Jake's vacant expression as he stepped into that infinite darkness. The worst part is the doubt. Sometimes in the quiet hours, I wonder if the police were right. If I imagined it all, maybe Jake did just get on a plane and leave. The human mind seeks rational explanations. It claws for them. But then I'll be walking down the street, and I'll see a poster for a magic show. Or I'll pass an old, dilapidated theater, and from a shadowed alleyway or from the static of a dead radio channel, I'll hear it. A faint, dry whisper on the edge of hearing. Every magic trick needs a witness, and I know I didn't imagine it. He's out there, the Vanishing Man, and he has my friend. And my purpose now, my terrible, cursed purpose, is to remember, to be the witness. Because if I forget, if I convince myself it wasn't real, then Jake will truly be gone forever. And the show will simply need to find a new audience.